What's the longest menstrual cycle you've ever had? I was sitting on my boyfriend's lap when my coochie started bleeding. Silas helped me put a tampon in, but I soaked through it in just 20 minutes. We rushed to the ER, and when I bled through the examination table paper 3 times, they insisted on keeping me overnight. The hematologist actually said, "This shouldn't be possible," while I just sat there shaking. The ride home was silent except for my apologies every time we hit a bump and I felt another gush. For 2 weeks, he kept making me these protein smoothies every morning, packed with iron for the blood loss. But the bleeding somehow got worse, and I was soaking through overnight pads in 30 minutes. When I mentioned this to Silas, he got defensive and said I was being ungrateful. His voice had this edge that made me shut up immediately. By day 23, I was going through a box of super tampons every 2 days. Silas had started this weird notebook, writing down timestamps and flow levels, and when I asked what it was for, he said documentation, in this flat voice that made my skin crawl. I'd catch him staring at me sometimes with this expression I couldn't read, like he was waiting for something. My mom stopped inviting me over after I bled through her couch, and the way she looked at me, like I was diseased, still makes me want to cry. The gynecologist prescribed birth control pills to stop the bleeding, but they made it 10 times worse. And when I called Silas crying from the bathroom floor, he seemed almost excited, asking about the color and consistency. That's when Relina, his ex-girlfriend, messaged me on Instagram. My hands were trembling as I read, "We need to talk about Silas. It's about your bleeding." We met at a coffee shop where she pulled up medical records on her phone showing she'd had unexplained bleeding for 2 months. "It started right after Silas began making me breakfast smoothies," she said. "It stopped the day I left him." But I noticed she kept shifting uncomfortably in her seat the same way I did when I felt another gush coming. When I confronted Silas that night, my voice shaking with rage and fear, he broke down sobbing. He admitted he'd been crushing Plan B pills into my smoothies because I'd mentioned wanting kids someday, and he wasn't ready. I had to grab the counter to stop myself from collapsing. But there was something wrong. That was 3 months ago. The bleeding should have stopped weeks ago, according to every medical website I frantically searched. He moved out immediately, grabbing that notebook like it was precious, and I was too exhausted to stop him. Day 65 came with blood still pouring out of me. Relina finally admitted she'd lied about it stopping, pulling adult diapers from her purse. A few weeks later, I was buying pads at the pharmacy when I ran into Silas. He was already with his new girlfriend, Emily. The way he smirked made bile rise in my throat, especially when I saw Emily buying iron supplements. The detective I'd finally convinced to investigate called me 2 weeks later. They'd found Silas's search history from before he met any of us. Hundreds of searches about permanent menstruation, and medical journal articles about untraceable poisons that trigger endless hemorrhaging. I threw up after that call, dry heaving over the toilet. His mother reached out after hearing about the investigation. When we met, she lifted her shirt slightly to show me her adult diaper, whispering Silas's father had done this to her 30 years ago. Her eyes were so empty when she said 30 years, I actually whimpered. When the day of the court case finally arrived, Silas's lawyer argued it was merely heavy periods, not assault. The prosecutor said they couldn't prove attempted murder, so he was let out scot-free. Update. Day 98 now, and I sleep in the bathtub because it's easier than destroying more sheets. Last night, I found his old laptop hidden in the closet. Videos of him practicing crushing different pills, perfecting the dose. In one video from 4 years ago, I heard him say, "She won't even know until it's too late to trace." I printed everything and drove to his new apartment with my own plan forming. Emily answered the door already pale. Her eyes had that same exhausted terror I see in my mirror every morning. When I handed her the evidence, she just stared at me with hollow eyes and lifted her shirt to show her own blood-soaked pad. She'd been bleeding for 2 weeks. We stood there, 2 women destroyed by the same man. Silas appeared behind her, that same smirk on his face. "You can't prove anything," he said. "It's just periods." Something snapped in me. Emily had already started recording on her phone, and when she asked him why he kept making her smoothies when she'd asked him to stop, his face changed. He grabbed for her phone and she stepped back, still recording, blood running down her leg. She looked at me with something dark in her eyes. "Let's end this," she mouthed. We both stood there frozen for like 3 seconds before our brains kicked in. Emily grabbed my wrist and we backed away from Silas's door real slow, not breaking eye contact with him until we turned the corner. Her car was parked 2 blocks away and we basically ran to it, both of us shaking so bad we could barely walk straight. The second we got in her car, she locked all the doors and pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. She started uploading every single video she'd taken to 3 different cloud accounts while I forwarded all the laptop evidence I'd found to my Google Drive, Dropbox, and iCloud. We kept checking the mirrors to make sure Silas wasn't following us. Emily drove us to this all-night diner on the other side of town, and we slid into a back booth where we could see the door. We made rules right there on a napkin. No seeing Silas alone ever again, check in with each other every single day, and tell someone where we were going at all times. Both of us were bleeding through our pads, and I could feel the warm wetness spreading as we talked. The vinyl seat under me was getting darker, and Emily kept shifting around uncomfortably. We stayed there until 4 in the morning, drinking coffee and making our plan. The next morning, I called that domestic violence hotline number the ER nurse had written on a card for me weeks ago. My voice was all shaky when I explained everything to the woman who answered. She scheduled me to come in that afternoon to meet with someone named Ayanna Gordon at their resource center downtown. Then I called the blood doctor's office that the ER had recommended, and the receptionist could hear how tired I was in my voice. She squeezed me in for the next morning even though they were booked solid. Emily came over to my apartment and we started this shared Google Doc where we wrote down everything. Every date, every symptom, every single thing Silas had said or done. Seeing it all typed out like that made the pattern so clear it was scary. We weren't crazy, and we weren't imagining things. That afternoon, I took the bus to the resource center and met Ayanna in this small office with motivational posters on the walls. She helped me make a safety plan and told me to lock down all my social media accounts right away. She'd seen medical abuse like this before and didn't question anything I told her. She believed me completely, without needing proof. The next morning, I went to see Dr. Deepika Malhotra at the blood clinic, and she took one look at my test results and started emergency treatment right away. She hooked me up to an IV for iron infusions and gave me pills to reduce the bleeding plus different hormone options to try. She kept saying we had to get my body stable first before worrying about evidence or legal stuff. When I asked about proving the poisoning, she got this sad look and explained that after this much time, it was basically impossible to trace. The important thing was keeping me alive and able to function. She scheduled me for iron infusions 3 times every week. 2 days later, I was back in that same chair getting my first real infusion and watching the dark red liquid drip through the IV tube into my arm. The machines beeped every few minutes and the whole place smelled like rubbing alcohol and plastic. Other patients sat in chairs around me getting their own treatments for different things. This was my new normal now, sitting in this medical chair 3 times a week for who knows how many months. My arm was already bruising from the IV needle, and I hadn't even finished the first week yet. Emily texted me from her own doctor appointment across town where she was getting checked out too. We were both dealing with the same nightmare, but at least we had each other now. The nurse came over to check my IV bag and adjust the drip rate. She said I'd probably feel tired after the infusion, and to take it easy for the rest of the day. I watched other patients come and go while my treatment continued, some of them looking just as exhausted as I felt. One woman next to me was on her phone the whole time talking about her work schedule around her treatments. This was just life now for people like us. When the infusion finally finished, the nurse carefully removed the IV and put a bandage on my arm. I had to sit there for another 15 minutes to make sure I didn't have any bad reactions before they'd let me leave. Emily picked me up outside and we went back to my place where I basically crashed on the couch. She made us both tea and we sat there updating our document with everything from our doctor visits. The evidence was growing, but so was our medical paperwork. My kitchen counter was already covered in appointment cards, prescription bottles, and insurance forms. Emily's purse had the same stuff spilling out of it. We were drowning in proof of what Silas had done to us, but somehow it still didn't feel like enough. Every 3 days, I'd be back in that chair getting more iron pumped into my veins just to keep me functional. Emily was starting her own treatment plan with her doctor. We texted each other constantly throughout the day, checking in and making sure we were both okay. The bleeding hadn't stopped for either of us, but at least now we had real medical help and each other to lean on. 3 days later, Ayanna called and said she'd found us a civil attorney named Regina Moore, who specialized in cases like ours. Regina's office was in this old building downtown with creaky floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed the whole time we talked. She had stacks of folders on her desk and kept taking notes while Emily and I went through everything that had happened. Regina looked at the videos on Emily's phone and the laptop evidence I'd printed and started nodding like she'd seen this pattern before. She explained that even though criminal charges hadn't worked, civil court had different rules, and we might have a better shot there. Emily kept shifting in her chair, and I could tell she was bleeding through her pad because I recognized that uncomfortable movement from my own experience. Regina said she needed to move fast before Silas could destroy any evidence or do something worse. Within an hour of us leaving her office, Regina had already sent legal letters to preserve evidence to Silas's apartment building, his workplace, and his internet provider. She texted me copies of everything she was filing, and I watched the documents pile up in my phone while sitting in the clinic waiting room for another iron infusion. The protective order requests she drafted were 20 pages each, listing every single thing Silas had done with dates and times and evidence attached. Emily kept finding more videos on her phone that she'd forgotten about, including one from 2 weeks ago where Silas was practically shoving a smoothie at her while she kept saying she wasn't hungry. In the video, you could hear him getting mad, his voice getting that sharp edge I remembered so well, demanding she drink it because he'd made it special for her. Emily's hand was shaking as she forwarded it to Regina, and I held her other hand while we sat in my car outside the clinic. That evening, my phone started going crazy with notifications from Instagram and Facebook. Silas had posted this vague thing about how some people make up stories when relationships don't work out, and how he was targeted by bitter exes. He didn't use our names, but everyone knew who he meant, because mutual friends started messaging me asking what was going on. Some of them seemed concerned, but others were clearly taking his side, asking why I was trying to ruin his life over a bad breakup. My hands were shaking as I screenshot everything before he could delete it later. Ayanna called me right away when she saw the posts, because Emily had sent them to her too. She came over to my apartment with a notebook and showed me how to document every single contact attempt, even the indirect ones through friends. She wrote out this script for me to use if anyone contacted me about Silas, and made me practice saying it out loud until it felt natural. The words were simple but firm, and I taped them next to my phone as a reminder. 2 days later, Regina brought in this guy named Adrian Rosen, who did digital forensics for court cases. He sat at my kitchen table with 3 laptops and some kind of external hard drive, going through every video and screenshot we had. He explained how he could prove the videos hadn't been edited by checking something called metadata, which showed exactly when and where they were taken. Adrian found details in the files that even showed what model phone recorded them and confirmed they matched Emily's device. He typed up this technical report that was 15 pages long with charts and timestamps and digital signatures that meant nothing to me, but Regina said would matter in court. The whole time he worked, I kept having to excuse myself to change my pad because the stress was making the bleeding worse. Dr. Malhotra had warned me that might happen, but knowing it didn't make it easier to deal with. When I went back to see Dr. Malhotra that week, she said we needed to try something more aggressive than just the iron infusions. She explained that hormonal suppression might help reduce the bleeding without needing surgery, which sounded better than getting cut open. We went through all the options and side effects, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over what was happening to my body. She prescribed these pills that I had to take every 8 hours exactly, and said it might take a few weeks to see improvement. Taking those pills felt like fighting back somehow, like I was finally doing something active instead of just bleeding and waiting. Emily texted me that night in a panic, because she was still living with Silas and had nowhere else to go. Her family lived across the country, and she couldn't afford to just leave her job and start over somewhere else. She'd hidden a second phone in her car that automatically uploaded everything to the cloud because she was scared Silas would find her main phone and delete the evidence. Every time he made her a smoothie now, she was secretly recording, even though it made her sick with fear that he'd catch her. The next morning, Emily sent me an audio file that made my whole body tense up. Silas's voice was clear as he stood over her saying she needed to drink the smoothie he'd made because she looked pale and needed the vitamins. When she said she wasn't hungry, his tone changed to that controlled anger I knew too well. You could hear him practically growling the words, "Just drink it," and then the sound of the glass being set down hard on a table. Emily's breathing in the recording was shaky, and you could hear her swallowing, probably forcing herself to drink it to avoid a fight. She texted me after that she'd only pretended to drink it, and had poured most of it down the sink when he went to the bathroom. But she was running out of ways to avoid it, and the bleeding was getting worse every day. Emily met with Ayana at the resource center the next afternoon while Silas was at work. They sat in this small room with motivational posters on the walls and planned every detail of her escape. Ayana helped her pack a go bag with clothes, copies of important documents, cash, and medical supplies that she could grab quickly if needed. They set up a code word with Emily's friends so she could call for help without Silas knowing what she meant. The plan was for Emily to leave while he was at work in 2 weeks, after she got her next paycheck and could afford a deposit on a new place. 3 days later, Emily started taking pictures of everything with her phone. She'd snap photos of the receipts from the grocery store next to the smoothies Silas made her, creating this timeline of when he bought what ingredients and when he served them to her. Her hands shook every time she did it, but she was getting more careful about documenting everything while still living with him. She'd pretend to be texting while actually photographing the glasses he gave her and the way he watched her drink them. The next morning, when she tried to skip the smoothie saying she wasn't hungry, Silas got this look on his face that made my stomach drop when she described it later. He slammed his hand on the counter and called her ungrateful for not appreciating how he took care of her. His exact words were, "You're being crazy and paranoid just like my ex," which Emily immediately texted to me while hiding in the bathroom. She sent me screenshots every few minutes of him pacing outside the bathroom door, asking if she was okay in there. I told her to stay strong and keep recording everything which she did by turning on voice memos on her phone. 2 days after that, Emily went to urgent care by herself because the bleeding was getting so bad she could barely stand up straight. The nurse who examined her asked a bunch of questions about her home life, and when Emily mentioned how Silas kept pushing drinks on her, the nurse wrote something down in her chart. Emily saw her type, "partner pressuring patient about food and drink intake," into the computer, which felt like the first time a medical professional was taking this seriously. The nurse gave her extra pads and told her to come back if things got worse, but also slipped her a card for a women's shelter just in case. Emily hid that card in her shoe and walked out feeling like someone finally believed something was wrong. The next week, while Silas was at his job, Emily met up with Ayana at the courthouse to file for an emergency protective order. Ayana helped her fill out all the paperwork, explaining each section, and making sure Emily included every detail about the forced smoothies and the bleeding, and his anger when she refused to drink them. The clerk at the window took one look at the forms and rushed them to a judge who signed the order immediately without even needing a full hearing. Emily's hands were shaking, so bad she could barely sign her name on the documents. That evening around 7 o'clock, building security knocked on their apartment door while Emily watched from behind the couch. Silas answered all confused, and the security guard handed him the protective order papers, telling him he had 15 minutes to pack his stuff and leave. Emily could hear him yelling about how this was his apartment too, but the security guard just stood there waiting. Silas grabbed a bag and threw clothes in it while cursing under his breath, and Emily stayed hidden until she heard the door slam. She watched from her window as he stormed off down the street, his face red with anger. The security guard came back up to check on her and said they'd put his photo at the front desk, so he couldn't get back in the building. Emily thanked him, but she knew she couldn't stay there much longer. She started packing her own stuff that night, throwing everything into boxes and trash bags as fast as she could. Her friend from college lived across town and had already said Emily could crash there as long as she needed. Emily changed all her routines too, taking different buses to work and shopping at different stores so Silas couldn't find her. Losing her apartment hurt because she'd lived there for 3 years and had made it feel like home, but being safe was worth giving that up. The next Monday, Emily went to HR at her office with copies of the protective order and all her documentation. The HR lady's face got more and more serious as she read through everything, then pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen so Emily could see it. There were 2 previous complaints from women who used to work there about Silas making them uncomfortable when he'd come to pick Emily up from work. One woman said he'd cornered her in the parking garage asking personal questions about her period, and another said he kept offering to make her special health drinks. The pattern was right there in black and white, and Emily felt sick realizing how many women he'd targeted. HR said they'd ban him from the property immediately, and would support Emily however they could. That night, Emily sat down with a notebook and followed Regina's advice to write down everything she could remember in order. She started from the first day Silas made her a smoothie, and wrote down every single time he'd pushed food or drinks on her, every time he'd gotten angry when she refused, every doctor visit she'd had for the bleeding. Writing it all out like that made her see how calculated it had been from the start. She organized everything by date and time, creating this detailed timeline that showed the escalation clearly. Her hand cramped from writing so much, but having it all documented in one place made her feel less crazy about what had happened. 3 days later, Emily was waiting at a bus stop when she felt that familiar gush of blood that meant she'd soaked through another pad. She started crying right there on the bench because she didn't have any supplies with her, and blood was already seeping through her jeans. A woman sitting nearby noticed and immediately dug through her purse, pulling out a whole pack of overnight pads and pressing them into Emily's hands. Emily tried to thank her, but just started sobbing harder at this small kindness from a stranger who didn't even know her story. The woman rubbed her back and said she'd been there too, that it gets better, and stayed with Emily until the bus came. That afternoon, Emily went to Regina's office to sign an affidavit and officially join the civil case with me. Regina had all of Emily's evidence organized in folders and boxes, everything labeled and ready for court. Emily's signature on those papers was shaky but determined, because she was done being scared and wanted to help make sure Silas couldn't do this to anyone else. Regina said having 2 plaintiffs made the case much stronger, and with all the documentation we had, she felt confident we could at least get some justice even if criminal charges hadn't stuck before. Emily looked at me across that conference room table, and we both knew this was just the beginning of a long fight, but at least we were fighting it together now. 2 days after that meeting with Regina, my phone buzzed with a text from Relina saying she'd been going through old boxes in her storage unit and found something that might help. She sent me a photo of her hands shaking as she held a dusty cardboard box labeled 2019 Never Open in black marker. I drove straight to her storage unit, my stomach tight with that mix of hope and dread I'd gotten used to. The metal door screeched when she rolled it up, and inside were stacks of boxes she'd packed when she fled from Silas years ago. She pulled out the one marked 2019 and set it on the concrete floor, her breathing getting faster as she cut through the tape. Inside were medical papers, receipts, and at the bottom, an old phone she'd forgotten about. Her hands trembled as she powered it on and scrolled through the photos until she found what she was looking for. There it was, a clear photo of Silas's notebook from when they were together, showing dates and times next to notes about her blood flow levels in his weird, neat handwriting. She'd taken the picture during one of their fights when he left it on the kitchen counter, something making her document it even though she didn't understand why at the time. The photo showed entries going back months with detailed notes about flow intensity, color, and her reactions to different foods he made her. Looking at it made both of us feel sick, because it was proof he'd been doing this for years, perfecting his methods. Relina immediately forwarded the photo to Regina, and then called her old gynecologist's office to request certified copies of her medical records from 2019. The receptionist recognized the urgency in her voice when Relina explained it was for a legal case, and promised to rush the request through their system. While we waited in that cold storage unit, Relina told me how Silas used to say documentation in that same flat voice when she asked about the notebook, like she was some kind of lab rat he was studying. The pattern was so clear now, him doing the exact same things to multiple women across years, and it made me wonder how many others there were who never came forward. Relina pulled up Silas's mother's social media profile on her phone and sent her a message asking if they could talk again because she suspected there might be more evidence going back even further. The message was careful and polite, but you could feel the urgency underneath the words. That weekend, Relina went to a support group meeting for abuse survivors that Regina had recommended, sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement. The other women there had been through different kinds of abuse, but they all understood the importance of documentation and evidence. One woman explained how multiple victims filing parallel civil complaints made each individual case stronger because it showed a clear pattern of behavior. Another survivor who'd won her case gave Relina tips about recording her statement, saying to hold up that day's newspaper for timestamp verification and speak slowly and clearly about specific incidents. Relina took notes on her phone, typing quickly as different women shared what had worked in their cases. The next morning, she set up her phone on a tripod in her living room and recorded herself holding up the Sunday paper with the date visible. She spoke for 23 minutes straight, detailing every single thing she remembered about Silas's behavior, from the smoothies to the notebook to the way he'd get angry when she questioned him. Her voice stayed steady even when she described the worst parts, like when she bled through her clothes at work and had to quit her job from the shame. She uploaded the video to 3 different cloud services and sent the links to Regina immediately. Despite knowing she'd face backlash from people who knew Silas, Relina agreed to be named publicly in our legal filing instead of staying anonymous like she could have chosen. She said seeing Emily and me fighting gave her the courage she'd been missing for years. Regina added Relina's evidence to our case file, organizing everything into a timeline that showed the pattern spanning almost 5 years. Meanwhile, someone leaked our case files to Peter Young, an investigative journalist who'd written about medical abuse cases before. Peter had won awards for exposing a doctor who'd been secretly sterilizing patients, so he recognized the seriousness of what we were dealing with immediately. His editor approved him pursuing the story after reviewing the evidence we'd collected, especially the photos of Silas's notebook and Emily's videos. Peter reached out to me through an encrypted email service, being careful and professional about how he approached the situation. He explained that his legal team needed to review everything before publication, but that he wanted to hear our stories directly from us. His email had links to his previous work, so we could see he was legitimate and had handled sensitive cases with respect before. I forwarded his email to Regina, who said it was our choice. But that media attention often helped cases like ours when the criminal justice system had failed. Emily and Relina both agreed we should talk to him because we wanted other women to know about Silas before he hurt them too. Peter started his investigation by meeting with Ayanna at the resource center on Monday morning. I wasn't there, but Ayanna told me later how he took notes while she explained the pattern. She showed him case files from other women who'd been hurt through medical abuse. These abusers never hit or left bruises, but they caused real physical damage that lasted way longer. Peter's pen moved fast across his notebook as Ayanna described how controlling someone's body through medical harm keeps victims dependent and confused. The abusers can claim they were just trying to help while secretly causing the damage. Peter asked if she'd seen cases with poisoning through food, and Ayanna nodded, pulling out 3 similar files. After leaving the resource center, Peter spent hours at his computer checking every detail from our videos. He found the apartment listings online that matched Emily's place exactly. The building permits showed the same layout we'd recorded. He even tracked down old social media posts that proved when Silas moved in with each of us. Every timestamp on our evidence matched public records perfectly. His editor called him that afternoon, demanding they reach out to Silas before publishing anything. Peter knew this was coming, but it still made him nervous. He spent 2 hours writing questions that wouldn't reveal how much proof we had. Simple stuff like asking about his relationships with us, and if he had any response to allegations of abuse. The editor approved the questions, and Peter picked up his phone. When Peter called Silas the next morning, I could hear about it later from the recording Peter made. Silas answered on the 3rd ring and immediately got defensive when Peter introduced himself. Peter asked his first question about the relationships, and Silas just said no comment. Then Peter mentioned the medical issues we'd reported, and Silas's voice got cold and threatening. He said Peter better be careful about printing lies and that his lawyer would destroy anyone spreading false stories. Peter kept his voice calm and professional, documenting every word and the hostile tone that matched exactly how we'd described Silas's anger. Meanwhile, Silas's mother sat at her kitchen table with a pen and paper. She'd been writing and crossing out words for 3 days now. Every time she tried to put down what happened to her 30 years ago, her hand would start shaking. She'd write about how her husband made her special drinks every morning, how the bleeding started slow then got worse, how he'd watch her with that same look Silas had. She folded the letter and unfolded it 20 times before finally calling Regina's office. The receptionist scheduled her for Thursday afternoon. When Thursday came, she drove to Regina's office 40 minutes early and sat in her car practicing what to say. Regina met her in the lobby and led her to a private room with soft chairs. Silas's mother asked what would happen if she spoke up after all these years. Regina explained she could give a statement without going public, or she could be an unnamed source, or she could fully participate if she felt safe enough. Regina said they'd protect her privacy as much as legally possible. That weekend, Silas's mother went to 3 different stores before finding a fireproof safe. The clerk at the 3rd store helped her pick one with a good lock. She drove home and spent the afternoon organizing 30 years of medical records into labeled folders, hospital bills from the bleeding, photos she'd hidden of the blood-soaked sheets, a journal from back then with dates and symptoms. She put everything in the safe and hid it in her closet behind old coats. The next time she met with Regina, she brought one specific memory that had been haunting her. She described how her husband would get angry when she complained about the bleeding. He'd say the exact same words Silas used with us, those same words in that same flat tone. Regina wrote it all down while Silas's mother's voice stayed steady, even though her hands were shaking. When Regina asked if she'd record a statement, Silas's mother thought for a long minute. She finally agreed, but said she wouldn't do any public interviews or court appearances. Regina set up a camera, and Silas's mother spoke for 12 minutes about what happened to her. She kept it factual and didn't cry even when describing the worst parts. She talked about the drinks, the bleeding, the way her husband documented everything in notebooks just like Silas did. When she finished, Regina saved the video to 3 different drives. 2 weeks later, I was at the clinic for my iron infusion when I saw Silas's mother in the waiting room. She walked over and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand without saying anything. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw 30 years of guilt and pain in them. I opened the note later in the treatment room while the IV dripped into my arm. Her shaky handwriting said she was sorry for not warning anyone, and that she should have known her son would turn out like his father. She wrote that she hoped we could stop him when she couldn't stop her husband. The note ended with her phone number in case we ever needed someone who understood. I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet where I still carry it today. 3 days later, Peter called asking if I knew anyone who could provide background on this type of abuse pattern. I texted Silas's mother the question, and she called back within 5 minutes. She told Peter she'd talk, but wouldn't give her name or do any photos. Peter set up the interview for that same afternoon at a hotel conference room downtown. She brought a box of old medical bills and photos from the 80s, showing blood-stained sheets and towels. Peter recorded her talking for an hour about how her husband would make her special drinks every morning. She showed him receipts for adult diapers from 1992, and hospital bills for severe anemia treatments. Her voice stayed flat while she described 30 years of bleeding that doctors couldn't explain. Peter took photos of all the documents with her hands holding them, but never her face. She left through a different exit than she came in. The next morning, Adrian came to my apartment with his laptop and external drives. He went through every video file checking timestamps and metadata to prove nothing was edited. He printed out reports showing the exact dates and times each video was created. Emily came over too, and Adrian checked her phone recordings the same way. He found hidden data showing Silas had tried to delete some files, but they were still recoverable. Adrian spent 4 hours creating a detailed report with technical proof that everything was real. He made 3 copies on different drives and gave one to Regina. That afternoon, a courier delivered thick envelopes from Silas's lawyer to me, Emily, and Regina. The letters demanded we stop making false claims and threatened to sue for defamation. Regina laughed when she read hers and started typing a response immediately. She attached copies of our police reports, medical records, and Adrian's technical authentication report. Her response letter listed every piece of evidence we had, including the videos of Silas forcing smoothies on Emily. She sent it back within 2 hours with delivery confirmation required. The lawyer never responded after that. 2 days later, I had my appointment with Dr. Malhotra at the hematology clinic. She'd been adjusting my medications for weeks, trying different combinations. This time, she added a new hormone blocker that had to be taken exactly every 8 hours. She showed me how to set phone alarms so I wouldn't miss a dose. The nurse taught me how to give myself iron shots at home between the IV treatments. Within 3 days, the bleeding went from soaking a pad every hour to just heavy spotting. I actually cried in the shower when I realized I could stand up without feeling a gush. Dr. Malhotra called it a small miracle, but said we'd probably need months more treatment. Friday morning, I woke up to 20 text messages from friends sending me a link. Peter's article was on the front page of the city newspaper's website. The headline read, "Pattern of medical abuse spans 3 generations," with a photo of bloody medical supplies. He'd interviewed 3 doctors about how someone could use Plan B to cause endless bleeding. The article included parts of our affidavits without using our full names. It described Silas's search history, and quoted the detective saying they couldn't prove criminal intent. Peter included a sidebar about warning signs of medical abuse in relationships. The comments section filled with women sharing similar stories about partners controlling their medical care. By noon, the article had been shared 8,000 times. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily saying Silas's work had called her asking questions. His company put out a statement that afternoon saying he was on administrative leave pending investigation. The HR director called me directly asking if I'd provide documentation for their internal review. I sent them the police reports and protective order paperwork that same day. Emily forwarded emails showing Silas's boss wanted all his company devices returned immediately. Security escorted him out of the building, according to a coworker who texted Emily. It wasn't jail, but watching him face real consequences felt like breathing fresh air. Saturday afternoon, Emily got a Facebook message from someone named Sarah who'd read the article. Sarah's sister had been bleeding for 6 weeks and her boyfriend always made her breakfast. Sarah recognized the pattern from our story and wanted advice on getting her sister help. Emily spent 2 hours on the phone with Sarah explaining what to document and which resources to contact. She gave her Ayana's number at the Domestic Violence Center. Sarah texted later that her sister had agreed to go to the ER and get tested. Our story was helping other women see what was happening to them. Sunday evening, I was watching TV when my phone rang from an unknown number. The voice was muffled, but I recognized Silas immediately when he said my name. He started saying I'd ruined his life and needed to drop the charges. I hung up and called Regina right away. She told me to save the call log and write down everything he said. She forwarded it to the police within 10 minutes with a note about protective order violation. The officer who called back actually seemed to care this time. He filed a report and said they'd investigate the number. Monday morning, Ayana picked me up for our hearing preparation session. We went to a quiet room at the courthouse where she'd reserved space for practice. She had me sit in the witness chair while she asked the questions the judge might ask. We went over dates and times until I could recite them without thinking. She taught me to pause before answering to make sure I understood each question. We practiced staying calm even when she asked harsh questions like Silas's lawyer would. She showed me where to look and how to speak clearly into the microphone. We spent 3 hours going through different scenarios. Ayana reminded me to stick to facts and avoid saying what I thought Silas was thinking. By the end, I felt ready, even though my hands shook thinking about seeing him. The hearing was set for Wednesday at 9 in the morning. Wednesday morning came fast, and I threw up twice before leaving for court, my hands shaking so bad I could barely button my shirt. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor cleaner when we walked in, and seeing Silas sitting at the other table made my stomach flip. Adrian went up first with his laptop and folders full of printouts, explaining to the judge how video files have hidden data that shows when they were made, and if anyone changed them. He pulled up Emily's videos on the screen and pointed to all the technical stuff that proved they were real, while Silas's lawyer kept interrupting to say none of this mattered for a protective order hearing. The judge wrote notes the whole time and actually leaned forward to see the screen better, asking Adrian to explain one part again about the metadata timestamps. When it was my turn to testify, I had to grab the rail to steady myself walking to the witness chair. I stuck to the facts like Ayana taught me, listing dates and times and what happened without guessing why Silas did anything. I showed the judge photos of my blood-soaked sheets and the receipts for boxes of tampons and pads, my voice only cracking once when I mentioned sleeping in the bathtub. The judge asked me how many days I'd been bleeding, and when I said 143, several people in the gallery gasped. Emily came up next and played the audio from her phone where Silas was telling her to drink the smoothie, his voice getting sharper when she said she wasn't hungry. The whole courtroom went quiet listening to him say, "Just drink it," in this cold voice that made my skin crawl all over again. People shifted in their seats, and I saw one woman in the gallery touch her stomach like she felt sick. The judge's face got harder, and she asked Emily to play it one more time, taking notes about the exact words Silas used. Then came the part where Silas had to answer questions, and his lawyer tried to keep him calm, but you could see him getting mad. The lawyer asked him about the smoothies and why he made them, and Silas started talking faster and louder about how we were making a big deal out of nothing. Then he said it, just blurted it out while waving his hands around. It was just Plan B. They're overreacting about some pills. The whole courtroom went dead silent, and even his lawyer's mouth dropped open. The court reporter asked him to repeat what he said, and Silas realized what he'd done, his face going white. The judge took off her glasses and stared at him for a long moment before calling a recess. We sat in the hallway for 20 minutes while the lawyers talked to the judge in her chambers, and when we came back in, the judge looked even more serious. She granted Emily and me protective orders for a full year, telling Silas that if he came within 500 feet of us or tried to contact us in any way, he'd go straight to jail. She said the criminal prosecutor's office would be getting a transcript of today's hearing, and they could decide about filing new charges. Silas had to turn in any weapons he owned within 48 hours, and the bailiff walked him out first, so we wouldn't have to pass him in the hallway. The next morning, I met with Dr. Malhotra at her office where she laid out all my options on her desk like a menu. She explained how an IUD could help control the bleeding better than pills, or we could try a different hormone shot, or there was a procedure to burn the lining of my uterus, but that was more extreme. I picked the hormone shot because I could stop it if it made things worse, and for the first time in months, I got to choose what happened to my own body. She gave me the first shot right there in the office, and scheduled me to come back every month to check my iron levels and adjust the dose. Regina filed our civil lawsuit that afternoon with all 3 of us listed as plaintiffs, asking for medical costs and pain and suffering damages. She said it would take years to get through the system, but having it on record mattered, and she was working for a percentage, so we didn't need money up front. Peter published his follow-up article about how the system failed us over and over, interviewing experts about why police don't take medical abuse seriously. That night, I actually slept in my own bed for the first time in months, just putting towels down instead of sleeping in the bathtub. I texted Emily and Relina about our iron infusion schedule for tomorrow, and Emily sent back a thumbs-up emoji and said she'd bring snacks. Relina said she'd drive us all since she knew where the clinic was, and we made a plan to get breakfast after if we felt okay. My bleeding was still heavy, but not the terrifying gush it had been, and having my friends who understood made it bearable. We weren't healed and might never be completely normal again, but we were holding each other up and keeping each other going, and right now that felt like enough to keep fighting. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. It's definitely been a journey worth sharing. Until we meet again, folks, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.